Welcome everyone! So as promised in my introductory video, this will be the first in a series of videos about William Shakespeare's Macbeth. I'm your host, Ryan Griffiths, and unlike Macbeth, I'm not the type of host who's going to murder you in your sleep. I'd say spoiler alert, but the play is already 400 years old at this point, so I'd like to remind/encourage everybody to leave any questions you may have in the comments section, whether it be about Macbeth, Shakespeare, or this channel in general. If you've got the play, I would suggest having it near you so that we can go over certain passages of it together when the time comes. I've got my copy of the play here in this big brick of a book, and I'm sure at the very least you can probably find the play online for free somewhere. I've also got a full glass of Diet Mountain Dew, which for me is essential. So let's begin. In this first video, I want to talk a bit about the play's historical background before we get into the play itself. And no discussion about the historical background of Macbeth would be worth much if we didn't talk for a bit about King James. King James I took the English throne in 1603. He had already been the King of Scotland for about 30 years before that. His ascension to the throne unified England and Scotland, which at the time were individual states. Before James, England had been ruled for 45 years by this lady, Queen Elizabeth I. Elizabeth had been very well liked in her time. Her reign was largely considered a success. You know you did a good job when they name an era after you. Shakespeare's time is known as the Elizabethan era, similar to how the reign of Queen Victoria in the 19th century is known as the Victorian Age. Elizabeth ruled for a much longer period of time than her most recent predecessors, which brought stability to a country that had had to deal with changing leadership every couple of years or so. She was known during her reign and afterwards as the Virgin Queen. Whether or not that was true, we'll never know. There were plenty of rumors about different noblemen, both local and foreign, who were friendly towards Elizabeth, but the fact of the matter is that she never married, so no relationship was ever legitimized. There are a number of potential reasons for this, and I'm only going to talk briefly about one of them, the political reason. England at the time was a Protestant country surrounded by Catholic ones. You can see the Protestant countries in blue and the Catholic ones in yellow. And then you have Lutherans and Calvinists over here. But you can see that the dominant religion of Europe at the time was Catholic. You had France to the southeast across the English Channel, Ireland to the northwest, Spain, and many others. And all of these countries were pledged to the Roman Catholic Church. And the Roman Catholic Church wanted to see England back under their control. Back then, if you wanted to get control of a country, you had two options. You could either conquer them through physical force or absorb them into your own power through an advantageous political marriage. The second option being the less costly and all-around happier way of doing things, that was what many of the leaders of these Catholic countries set about doing. Now Elizabeth was aware of this, and she knew that to accept the marriage proposal of any of these leaders would be to allow England to fall back under Catholic dominion, which is something that she certainly didn't want. But she also knew that to flat out reject these suitors would lead them to deciding to take control of England by force, which she didn't want either. So for the better part of her reign, what she ended up doing was being a sort of tease, never outrightly rejecting any of these foreign princes, but never accepting any of them either. This also meant that she couldn't marry anybody from England either, even if she had wanted to, because then all of those princes would have known that they no longer stood a chance. This strategy worked for the most part, but of course the downside was that when she died in 1603, she hadn't had any children to act as natural heirs to the throne. Everyone in England was concerned that the fighting over control would start up again, with everybody staking a claim. It was eventually decided, however, to get a hold of King James from Scotland and offer the throne to him. Even though he was Elizabeth's nephew, there was some concern about James taking the throne. His mother, Mary, had ruled England prior to Elizabeth and had been a devout Catholic, and during her reign Protestants had been persecuted, tortured, and killed. All of this had earned her the moniker Bloody Mary, which is stuck to this day. James, however, was a Protestant, and he was the best option anybody in England could come up with to please everyone, so he got the job. Very little was known about him personally, however. The people in London knew only two things about James. One, he was from Scotland, and two, he was obsessed with witchcraft and the occult. Now, I don't mean that he practiced witchcraft, quite the opposite. He was obsessed with finding witches in England and ferreting them out. He's mostly known nowadays for his patronage of the 1611 authorized version of the Bible that has come to be known as the King James Bible. But he also published his own book called Demonology, which was a classification of the different kinds of demons and was a sort of how-to guide for finding out witches, and it warned about the dangers of magic and spellcasting. James believed that the very presence of witches in the land would lead to bad things, ranging from political upheaval to natural disasters. Now let's turn from James to see what William Shakespeare was doing at the time. He had already established himself as a professional playwright quite some time prior to that. In fact, he and his acting company had gotten so famous that during Elizabeth's reign, they received the patronage of the Lord Chamberlain, which was basically a high-ranking government official, and they became known as the Lord Chamberlain's men. To receive the patronage, in other words, the financial support of a nobleman, was one of the best cases an acting company in the 17th century could ever hope for. Now, when James came to the throne, there was probably a very real concern on the part of Shakespeare and those who worked for him. Would they be able to maintain their position of privilege under this new king or not? It's the same sort of anxiety one might feel upon walking into work one day and realizing that you have a new boss and that your old one, who liked you, is gone. Shakespeare likely didn't know any more about James than any other Londoner at the time, which, as I said earlier, was that he was from Scotland and he was interested in witches. In comes Macbeth. Macbeth, written sometime between 1603 and 1606, features two things rather prominently throughout the play: Scotland and witches. The play can be read very much like an appeal to James's good graces. We know that it was performed in front of King James and that James did become the patron of Shakespeare's company, renaming them the King's Men. This doesn't mean that Macbeth was written for purely political purposes. Far from it. The play is much deeper than that, and to view it as nothing more than a sort of brown-nosing to the new king doesn't do it justice at all. But that was certainly a part of the process. Those two elements, Scotland and witches, dominate the play. In fact, it is sometimes referred to simply as the Scottish play. This is largely due to a superstition that has arisen surrounding the play that it is unlucky to perform, and that there is a curse on the play if you pronounce the name of its protagonist, Macbeth. Many in the theater world take this curse seriously, even to this day, and the play does have a sort of a weird performance history surrounding it. Riots and injuries have happened during performances, and apparently one time an actor somehow ended up getting stabbed on stage with a real knife, all because somebody backstage said the name Macbeth. A modern-day example of this sort of name paranoia is in the Harry Potter series, where the villain Voldemort is he who must not be named. The remedy for breaking this curse is for the person who uttered the forbidden name to immediately leave the building, walk around it 3 times, spit over their shoulder, and shout an obscenity before being invited back in. So in place of calling the play by its title, many simply call it the Scottish play, and if you're in the theater world, you know what they're talking about. While we're talking about the play's performance history, it might be worthwhile to discuss some of the more notable modern performances that there are out there. One version that I particularly like can actually be found in full here on YouTube. You can find it just by searching Macbeth, and it should be in your top results. It was filmed in 1978 and stars Ian McKellen, who's famous for portraying Gandalf and Magneto in recent years as Macbeth, and Judi Dench as Lady Macbeth. If you're a Star Wars fan, you'll also recognize Ian McDiarmid, the actor who plays Emperor Palpatine, as both the Porter in Act 2 and, if I remember correctly, Ross. The latest version to come out, and one that I have not seen yet, was a movie released in 2015 starring Michael Fassbender, who has also played Magneto, as Macbeth. From the trailer I've seen, it looks really good, very high quality, and I suspect that it would probably be worth checking out. I plan to do so whenever I get the time. So that should give you at least a general sense of the circumstances in which Macbeth was written and a little bit about its history. In the next video, we'll get into the play itself, so I hope to see you then.